Okay, so today's topic is how the brain stores memories and its inspiration for long context in AI. Most of the talk will be more about how the brain stores starting from the very basics, and we will be building whatever our knowledge is to that point. Then we will talk about some recent papers. We'll be talking about a paper from ByteDance that uses the concepts of neuroscience to build efficient context for large language models. Okay, so today's topic is how the brain stores memories and its inspiration for long context in AI. Basically, we will be covering two things here, and most of the talk will be more about how the brain stores memories, and we will be building whatever our knowledge is to that point, starting from the very basics. Then we will talk about some recent papers. We'll be talking about a paper from ByteDance that uses the concepts of neuroscience to build efficient context for large language models. Right? So, who am I? So, my name is Yash, and I'm the co-founder of Rescive. So, we are a small team with big ambition. We are building the first unified research operating system for R&D teams. Essentially, how many of you are researchers here by any chance? Okay, a lot of them. Right. So you must have seen the struggle of managing different papers, reading across different websites, then managing different tools for citations, writing papers. It's a mess. So what we are doing is we are bringing all of it together into one place and create the first unified research operating system that takes you from ideas to publication at one place. Right. So that's pretty much about me. Let's talk about what we will cover, the important stuff. So we'll start with what is computational cognitive neuroscience. Big words, but we'll try to break it down to understand it better. Then we will talk about the foundational unit of our brain, that is the neuron, and how it works. Alright? Finally, once we understand how neuron works, we will see the synergy of these neurons to create what we call neural networks inside our brain that leads to emergence of behavior that alone neurons could not do. So that will be something that we will cover. Now that we know that how neural networks are made, how do they learn? That is something interesting, and we will be covering it inside the learning chapter, learning topic, where we will be talking about Hebbian learning. That is one of the famous methodologies of understanding how brain does the learning part. Finally, once we have 1, 2, 3, 4, we have all the ingredients to understand how memory works inside the brain. We will be studying how the hippocampus works. How many have you heard the term hippocampus before? Okay, a lot of people. So it's going to be exciting. And finally, once we know how the brain works, how the memory stores, we will be talking about the recent ByteDance paper, how it is working and how it takes inspiration from the existing knowledge in neuroscience. Alright? Now, please feel free to ask question anytime. Right? I want to keep it as interactive as possible. And I know all of you must be very tired. It's a Friday. So yeah, let's just make it interesting for everyone. Right? So, the first question, what is cognition? Anyone? You can be wrong. It's all good. What is? Yes. Yes. A part of it. Anyone else? Okay. No worries. So, cognition refers to the set of mental processes your brain uses to acquire, store, and transform and apply information. Big words. What it means is simply how your brain makes sense of what is happening around the world and how to act upon it. Right? So now we know what cognition is. What is cognitive neuroscience? Anyone? So basically, it connects the part of brain wirings. We try to understand how the brain is making sense of what is happening around it, the cognition part, from the perspective of neuroscience, how the brain wirings are working inside, right? And finally, after we understand these two things, we come to the computational part. Now, computational cognitive neuroscience studies cognition by building computational models. right? So we understand cognition through the lens of neuroscience by building models. All right? So anybody, how many of you understood like what have I said? You did not? Okay, nice. So this field of computational cognitive neuroscience is an evolving field. It's not a fixed science like something like physics that we are like pretty much matured, right? And we are finding new data every time we see it. So when we are building computational models of stuff that is actually developing right now, how would we do it? It's like we don't have a fixed part with respect to which we can build models. So it's a two-way street, right? Once we get a lot of data, we try to understand patterns in it to make computational models. But on the other hand, if we have a computational model, we can test the data to figure out if the data stands correct or not. Are we discovering something new, right? So it's a two-way thing. Now, to understand this, how the brain works, a layman would do simply wire everything inside the neuron, right, and create a complete replica of what we are like, how the brain works. But the problem with it is that if you create it, you won't do any learning. You won't understand the fundamental parts, how exactly everything is getting together. So we come to two stages of the scientific method in computational cognitive neuroscience. The first is reductionism, breaking down information into the tiniest parts, the quantum of information, right? And then there is reconstructionism, which means building all these quantums of information into one big part, and it leads to emergence of behavior that alone a single quantum of information could not show, right? Let's understand this with an example. We have two gears here, right? Everybody can see? Good. So we have two gears here. Let's say these are independent. They do not interact with each other, all right? So if this rotates, nothing happens to the smaller one. But let's say they interact with each other. What will happen? If you rotate the bigger one, you will notice some torque on the smaller one. Torque is something that happened after we interacted. After these two things combined together, it led to emergence of something very new, right? So this was about emergence. Now a question can come. We care about cognition, right? How everything, like how do we understand stuff? So why do I need to care about the internal workings? I can just say that if XYZ is happening, then ABC would happen, right? We can make logics of it. Why do I need to know how the neuron is working, how the internal workings are happening? Because if I just care about the emergent behavior, right? And we can actually compare it with something like a computer software, which is driven by logics, right? We can simply say that there is some static logic running behind the model, right? And the emergent properties can be understood. Like before it, everything is certain, everything is constant, and we know it already, right? Do you notice what the problem is here? Anyone? Think. What will happen if what's the problem in this? Why can't we do it?
Because the brain is way cheaper and it's organic and it doesn't take electricity like how much computer takes, and it's much more efficient. So you want to learn from that.
I see. What about you?
We have very different sort of like artificial building blocks. Natural building blocks are very different and we don't understand them properly.
So the brain is mostly neurochemistry, right? So there's a lot more than just a single linear function being optimized in our brains.
Makes sense.
I mean, this kind of structure will not be able to evolve with new information coming towards it.
I think the answer is average of all these answers. Basically, the problem is that we cannot treat the internal layers as constant because everything is uncertain. Now, if we say about the computers, they run on one human architecture, right? we know the logics. We don't need to think of it in probabilistic terms. But when we talk about the brain, everything is probabilities inside. So, no, you cannot treat it like a standard static logic. This is what we covered, yes. So, how do we bring uncertainties into the system? How do we program or help our models predict the uncertainties? So, the domain of computational cognitive neuroscience, or CCN, is quite interesting. The trajectory started with symbolic or logic driven understanding. What that means is what we were talking right now, static logics, right? But we soon realized that it is not like that. There is an unpredictability into the system. And then we jumped into the Bayesian system, Bayesian cognitive neurosciences, where we say that we can maybe think of all these terms and combine it into a probabilistic thing, right? Everything all good? Everybody is understanding? Yes. So we say that fine, we can introduce probabilities using the Bayesian system and say ki if XYZ is happening, then there is a probability of ABC happening. But what is the problem in this? Who said black box?
Black box is the problem.
Yes, you're right. This is black box. Because we are talking about probabilities, we don't know the internal workings. Why is it like that? Why is there, like, what's the point of this probability? Right? And how do we replicate it? What's the internal information going inside? So that brought us to the reductionism part. Breaking it further, then we came to neuroscientific method that explores the insides of a brain, how the wirings work, to create basically the models to understand cognition through the neuroscientific perspective, and that is where we are right now. Right? So to understand how things differ, this one is essentially when we were using Bayesian method, right? Probabilities. We did not know where things came from. We did not know the wirings inside. So it was like a jigsaw puzzle. It was like a jigsaw puzzle of sky, of entirely blue color. Imagine how difficult will it be to make sense of it. But when we take the neuroscientific method, we know the internal wirings. We know how the brain is working to a better extent. So we can make sense of data. Plus, a very good thing about the neuroscientific method is that there is a large amount of data already available. So you can basically pick pieces and join them together to build a larger, understanding. Right? Now, okay, a random question. Anyone? How many people do you know right now? Any guess, roughly, like you know by name? 50 to 80. Anyone else?
Maybe 1,000.
You know 1,000 people.
Worldwide, sure, why not? I can name 1,000 names.
Wow, we have an outlier. What about you? 100 and 150. Fine. The neuron is connected to 10,000 other neurons. It's incredibly social. And the most recent part inside a brain, that is the neocortex, has roughly 20 billion of such neurons working inside it. Neocortex helps us in making cognition happen, more high-level understanding tasks. So let's multiply it. 10,000 into 20 billion. That is 200 trillion connections. What's the size of the largest model of, let's say, LLM? 1.2 trillion. The recent part, that's the most recent part, and that has 200 trillion connections. So the neuron is incredibly social and much more social than we as humans. And they combine information from different places to make sense of the world. So now we will talk about the most fundamental part of the brain, that is the neuron. How many of you have heard the term neuron before? Wow. Yes. So this is the building block of our brain. What we are seeing right now is the pyramidal neuron. Pyramidal neuron is something that is present inside a neocortex. Neocortex is the most recent part that we were talking about, right? For understanding, the basics and the overview of how things work for cognition, we need to understand three terms. The first is dendrite. Dendrites are branched tree-like projections from neuron used to communicate information to cells, right? Forward and backward. Axon is the long tail, round tail that transmits the output of a neuron signal to other cells. And the synapse is the junction between two neurons. Synapse is what we care about right now. How two neurons communicate to give information to each other. So neurons, how do you understand them? Okay, let me turn it back. Okay, what does a neuron do? A very basic guess. It can be wrong and it can be very abstract.
Store experiences.
Store experiences.
Take some input, process it, and puts it out.
Nice.
Past information.
Past information.
Something like transmitting electricity.
Transmitting electricity. Nice.
Something like
Logic gate. You three are right. Like if you combine the information together. So neurons are essentially smoke detectors, right? Like the one we have at home. We can understand with that analogy. Now, if the smoke is high enough, then it will beep. Similarly, the neuron is continuously at war with multiple excitations and inhibitions. Excitation says that the neuron should fire. Inhibition says, no, you should not fire, right? It's a constant fight with them, and it's basically noticing that if the activity, the impulse of saying that yes, it should fire exceeds a particular threshold, it will fire. And that is how neuron works. Basically, it takes inputs, understands that if it should excite or inhibit, and accordingly, if the excitation is high enough, it will fire a signal. Was it clear to everyone?
Yeah. So just one quick question. The threshold level, right? So with fire, whether to pass through signal to next neuron or not, does that keep changing or it's fixed? Like,
It changes. It changes. And it's something that we will cover in learning. How does it change? The thresholds. For the sake of time, I actually did not cover it completely, but if you want to understand it, there is something called as extended contrastive activator learning. I sent the link to book. It's, I think, chapter number 4. You can read it. Right? So what did we cover? It takes inputs, right, from synapses, from different cells. It checks if the excitation exceeds a particular inhibition, and then if excitation is good enough, it will do a neural firing, that is sending spike. This is what I was talking about. The neurons are at war. They are constantly fighting between inhibition and excitation and trying to figure out that when the tug of war will end and it will fire a signal. So you can see the theta, right? That's the threshold after which it will say, fine, I'll fire. The excitation is the excitatory input that is coming. The inhibition is the input that is saying, no, you should not fire. Alright? So what did I write here? Yeah, exactly. We covered it. So if you want to think about the firing, you can think of it in terms of potential, electric potential, right? So when inhibition comes, so the neuron in itself is polarized towards the negative end, right? So when the inhibition happens, it basically says that I'll make it more negative. And the objective is to depolarize the neuron, basically bring it to zero or the particular after the theta potential to fire the circuit, to fire the, basically whatever, fire the neuron. So the excitation increases the potential, the inhibition brings it down. And this is the play of the two things. Yes?
Sorry, a quick question. Does more firing mean more cognition? Is it better to have excitation or inhibition? Is it something like that?
Okay, so we are in a balance. So we were talking about the pyramidal neuron. Actually, I was covering it in future, but okay, fine. So the neocortex has 85% excitatory input that is coming through, excitatory neurons, and 15% as the inhibitory, saying no, it should not happen, right? And we are almost always on the verge of having epilepsy. That if the inhibition like decreases, like it is not able to control the excitation, the whole neurocortex will fire up, it will heat up, and you will log into an epilepsy seizure.
How does it decide whether it should be excitation or inhibition?
Excitation or inhibition, how do you decide it?
Like, there should be a point, right, in body itself. I don't think there will be a logical way, but there should be a way, right, where neuron makes a decision, okay, I should excite now.
Yes.
So
Yes.
are there any rules to that? Are there any static rules, or is it a dynamic
It's a dynamically changing thing when it should fire.
based on different variables?
Yes. So basically we will be covering something as called as the Hebbian learning, which, how many of you have heard Hebbian learning? Oh, a lot of people. I did not know before this thing, so that's really cool. So it basically says, yes.
Well, the question I asked, when brain we have like neurons itself is different, right? We have like excitatory neurons, we have inhibiting
Yes.
neurons.
Yes.
So whatever the inhibiting neuron receives inputs, so it's basically going to send the output to suppress the
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Otherwise, the excitatory will increase, and basically the whole system will go out of balance, and we will log into a seizure, right? Because everything is firing. We don't know, like, right? So yes. Now this is a bit complicated. We are talking about how the communication between two synapses happen. Everybody knows what a synapse is now. It's the junction between two neurons, how they communicate. How does the communication happen between them? So we have got something called as the neurotransmitters. What neurotransmitters do is, basically they are the messenger things that tells the connection that yes, you should do XYZ behavior. So technically we will talk about the two. This is a very superficial level. We will be talking about two neurotransmitters, that is the glutamate and the GABA. Glutamate says yes, fire. GABA says no, don't fire. In like for this particular part at an overview, but it becomes more complicated as we go in depth, right? Now what happens is, this red one is called the postsynaptic, this is called the presynaptic neuron. This is called the postsynaptic, the blue one, right? So pre means the signal is coming from this part, the red, and is going to blue, right? So what happens is, let's say this presynaptic thing fires, right? It will release neurotransmitters, right? So for example, gamma or glutamate, they will get attached to the postsynaptic neurotransmitter, and it will cause opening of channels that will let the inflow of ions. These ions are basically creating the potential that we are talking about, the adjustment, high, up, down. This is how it happens, right? The neurotransmitter attaches itself, the channels open, and it lets the inflow of ions, right? So we will talk about three channels that are more important. The first is the GABA channel. GABA is the inhibitory channel. AMPA is the excitatory channel. And then we have something called as NMDA. NMDA is where the Hebbian learning thing happens. Two neurons fire together, they wire together thing, right? So we will be talking about them in depth in the coming slides. Any questions, by the way, till here? No questions?
This spiking is continuous, right? It's not discrete.
It's continuous, yes. So it fires, there is a refractory period, after which the neuron cools down, and then it can fire again. Typically this happens 100 to 200 times in a second.
Is that defined at a systemic level, or is that per neuron, post excitation for it to?
It's like something that we have noticed inside the brain. Yes.
How many ions are transferred, or how much voltage is exchanged?
How much ions are transferred?
Like how much voltage is exchanged between synapses?
So essentially how the voltage is increased, essentially we were talking about the AMPA receptor, right? So the glutamate attaches itself to it, then the sodium inflows. So our brain is inside a salt solution, right? So sodium gets included inside the neuron, that raises the potential, right? Once it reaches a particular threshold, then the channels inside, there are multiple channels for sodium that are blocked, they suddenly open. That leads to rapid inflow of the sodium ions inside the neuron, which causes this extreme rise of potential, or that we know it as the spike, right? So your question, how many ions pass into, it's a very relative question. It can vary based on how the model is learning, how many channels are open, so on, right? Yes, we covered this. So let's talk. Okay, fine. Now we know how the firing happens, right? How will we make a computational model of this? What can we do? So what's the first step, the scientific step? How will you understand what model to make? Anyone? To basically replicate what we saw right now.
So you know how to design a neuron to start with.
Design a neuron.
Right.
How would you do that? Okay. Anyone else? No answer? Logic gates. Fine. But how do you know which logic gate?
I mean, like basics of neural networks, like you design algorithms. So for example, bot and code is the first sort of.
I would say there is a one more fundamental step to it. We can look at the data, like every machine learning stuff. Look at the data, see the plots, and figure out how to plot it or what model to make exactly, right? So that's what we did. So we basically saw the firing, a normalized firing with respect to the membrane potential. The membrane potential that we were talking about in the neuron, right? If it exceeds, then it will fire. So we made a plot of it.
So this is for a biological neuron or for a...
Sorry? This is a simulation, like how can we make sense of what we saw and convert it into a computational model. So that is what we are talking about here.
No, I did not understand the raw data.
Raw data, okay. So basically we have a firing rate, right?
Firing rate of what?
Neuron. So we were,
Biological neuron.
yes, biological neuron. Right?
Raw data is coming from biological neuron and you are plotting it in a computer.
Yes, we are trying to plot it and basically see patterns inside it. Can we make sense of it? Can you make sense of it?
What are the axes?
What are the 2 X and Y?
This is the firing rate. The y-axis is the firing rate. All right. The x-axis is the potential, the membrane potential at which it was firing. All right.
So this membrane potential, right? What is that like depending on exactly? The membrane potential.
It depends on the number of channels for the inflow of sodium ions.
So is that like fixed for a human or it varies?
It varies. It's a learning process. It will change with time, or how the other neurons are interacting with the neuron.
So this thing can be higher than mine essentially.
For some, yes. For like it's a neuron level activity, right? So we have this plot. Can anybody make sense of? Yes, you have a question?
When you say firing, are you including inhibition and excitation both in this application or?
Okay. When does a neuron fire? It fires when the excitation exceeds the inhibition, right? And there's one more thing called as a leak current, but we care about the, for simpler terms, when it exceeds the inhibition, it will fire, all right? So based on that, if we average it out inside an area, the firing rate, how many times in a second is it firing? We can make this plot, right? And we can compare it with the potential of the membrane at that time, all right? So we see this plot. Does it make sense to anybody? Can we do anything to make it into an equation?
How many corrections it has? What does the potential mean? How many corrections it has?
It can vary. So at a neuron level, let's say that all stuff is taken for. We have this plot right now. How can we make sense of it?
So what I am sensing is the more the potential, the more sensitive the neuron is, and the more sensitive the neuron is, obviously there will be more excitations.
But can you make a single equation out of it?
It depends. on the what I said the last sentence, what's the potential, what's the variables for that potential?
I see.
Have that benefit.
Makes sense, and I think you are at the right track. Right now, what we are seeing is the potential of the membrane and the firing rate, right? There is no one-to-one relation into it, right? So a particular excitation can have multiple types of membrane potential. So there is no one-to-one mapping that we can create like a single function. So we looked a bit deeper and found out that the conductance or basically the open channels inside the neuron has a good relation with how the spikes are happening, and we saw this plot, right? Now, can we make sense out of this? So the y-axis is the spike rate and the x-axis is the g bar e, that is the conductance, that is the amount of channels open, right? So can we make sense of this? Think. Can we make a formula out of it? A sigmoid, right?
Sigmoid.
Yes, this is sigmoid. So, okay, screw it. So this looks like sigmoid, and this is how personally I come from a deep learning background, and I got into computational cognitive neuroscience just out of interest. I wanted to see something fundamental. And it's beautiful to see that something that you have studied in a theoretical manner, you are seeing it inside a brain. Exactly same kind of stuff going on. And this equation, I forget the name of this equation, but this was discovered in 1913, that back. And we are seeing it right now in our models. So crazy. So this function is called an XX1 function, but yes.
So this graph will change as more data is gained. What we have is kind of a confluence.
Sorry, I did not get your question.
As more data, as we test this x and y axis with more data, this graph will change.
Yes. So we did multiple tests to find out this particular graph.
For induction process, if it is working for 0, then it is working for 1, it is working for n, then 2 plus 1. Is that how you...
Yes, this type of behavior was noticed across the neurons, right? Yes. So we saw something familiar, right? Now we basically know how a neuron works. Can anybody like to summarize it for everybody else? Anyone?
Firing rate depends on the number of open channels, and that depends on the amount of sodium ions that the neuron receives.
A very brief, like how does a neuron fire? Like if you had to explain it in a very simple term.
If you get a lot of excitation from different neurons, then this particular neuron will also fire.
Exactly, good. So we basically know how a neuron fires at a basic level, right? Now what happens if all these neurons synergize together, they join together? We see neural networks, yes. And this synergy, so we were talking about emergence, right? Some time back. That basically means how different, basically the Gare example. When two independent things combine together, two quantum of information, it leads to emergence of some kind of new behavior that was earlier not seen, right? So that is what happens in networks. We see categorization. Essentially, all the networks, what are they doing? They are taking the information and basically dropping them into different buckets, right? We are making file system. Our brain can be understood as a file system, a very complex and sophisticated file system that stores information based on like what context it is. So basically we can say that a chair will have a particular bucket where a similar kind of information will fire up. So there are buckets, there are clusters inside the brain that fire based on the, let's say, based on the information that is happening. So it leads to categorization, right? Bidirectional excitation. How does a feed-forward network work? Anyone?
So, in feed forward neural network, the output is again fed into the system.
No, I'm asking how does a general feed-forward network work? I'm not asking how can we do this here.
You have a set of neurons.
Yes.
And thinking about the output that comes is again fed as input to the computer.
Yes. So basically you take an input, pass it through a neural network and get an output, right? It's a forward flowing process, right? But our brain does not work like that. This made me like, it is very funny. We talk about creating artificial humans, we talk about creating brains, but our brain actually does not work like that. So it has a bidirectional excitation. While things are traveling forward, they also travel backward, right? So each neuron can communicate with other neurons, forward and backward. And we can see this in an example. Let's say your partner is in a mall or in a party and there are lots of people there. You need to figure out, you need to find your partner. How would you do that? Now there are thousands of people. You cannot simply just say that I'll check each and every person out. You will try to find specific information, some kind of existing information that I can use to basically pinpoint in those thousands of people. Like let's say the person is wearing a red jacket, right? So while we are traveling forward, while we have that thousands of people going in, we also have another information, a multiple constraint problem where we know that the jacket is red. And basically that information can travel backward to find the exact person, your partner. Did you understand this? Clear? Right.
How is this different than the ByteDance? How is it different than feed-forward plus back propagation?
Yes. In feed-forward plus back propagation does not happen always. It's like you have frozen that brain in time.
So it's sort of like a continuous back.
Yes. It travels forward and backward, trying to reach, let's say, a consensus point for multiple constraints, right? Now the final emergence thing that we are going to talk about, that is the inhibitory competition. I think we are slow, yes. We will talk about the inhibitory competition, that is the survival of the fittest. Now, what will happen if a neuron fires at everything? Let's say it fires on seeing red, it fires on seeing a box, it fires on seeing a camera. It makes no sense. There is no definition to it, right? So the brain is, rewarded for creating task-specific neurons, right? So which fire on a very particular type of information. And what that helps is, it helps us in creating a distributed information network inside our brain. It basically helps us make domain-specific information that is not activating at whatever it is seeing. It's like jack of all trades, master of none kind of situation. So the brain avoids that, at least in neocortex, yes.
So one quick question. So why this bidirectionality part? I just want to understand. So, like, have people tried implementing it neuron and why is it hard in replicating addiction neurons?
I don't think I have an answer for this. I need to search more, right? But I think it might be because of the computation it takes. Like we cannot keep constantly training models. A 1.2 trillion, 1.2 trillion parameter model, right?
Is this sparse encoding a fundamental property of the neuron, or is that learned? Like, does it become sparser over time, or?
No, it's a property that it has been seen, like over time it has been built inside the brain, and we will see why it is so important for storing memories. Yes, categorization and distribution. Now I think all of your elders must have told you that you will become the average of your peer group, right? We can actually see that here, and I'll tell you why. Let's say you how do you know that I'm real? No, you are seeing it. How do you know I'm real? It can be that you are in your sleep, you are dreaming.
I mean, how do we know we are in a reality?
Yes, how do we know?
Does it look like simulation?
Exactly. Why does it not look like a simulation?
Because my past experiences of reality tell me that you are real enough.
Exactly. Basically, what we are seeing here is that whatever we do in society, our brain basically tries to understand it and make categories out of it. There is no logic like physics. There are no Newton laws. We basically see things and make sense of it and make it into categories. So if, let's say, in Hindi we call it salt namak. If I lock a person inside a room and say that person manak, it's not namak, it's manak, and then that person comes out after 20 years, he will not know what namak is because the brain has understood it as manak, right? So yes.
So these categories, right? Does the brain store it in like a fixed schema of sorts, or is it very dynamic?
I would say that there are specific parts inside brain that light up when you show similar information, right? So what we will see next is that your brain basically divides this information, let's say the concept of a chair, into multiple categories and creates a distributed representation of the information. So your question was again? Yeah.
Fixed schema.
Yeah, so there is no fixed schema, but we see a similar type of firing, like similar areas inside the brain.
So a bit of a digression, but like whether the memory storage happens, like if all we are discussing about is inhibition and excitation, right? Like
Your memories are electrical signals. Everything that you see, hear, or like live, whatever you remember are simply electrical signals.
The aggregation of those signals.
Yes. So again, what you were talking about, the categorization part. So it has been noticed, okay, so what is this? You understand this, right? This is basically the firing inside the brain, right? So it has been noticed that when you show similar information, there are firings in similar areas, right? Basically, so we can say that there are local groups where these firings are happening for a particular information set. So that's what we were talking about here. Let's say, okay fine, let's move ahead. So I was talking about similar, like specific firing areas, right? Let's say this part. It might mean something related to a chair, right? Now, what do you think? This firing, is it a 0 or 1 event?
At an aggregate level?
At an aggregate level.
Let's say it is between 0 and 1. Right?
Yes. And that is what we will talk about next. The graded representation, right? So this particular thing comes from the inferior temporal cortex of a monkey, right? It was shown different types of images, and we basically plotted it inside its brain to see what kind of areas are getting activated, and we saw that similar information was shown in similar areas. So similar shapes basically made the brain light up in the same areas, similar areas, right? Any questions there?
Does everyone have the same areas that it was sparse up?
I think he will know the answer.
Is it same area for all the humans?
Yeah, I mean, the broad level, yeah, it's like the brain is like modularly organized, but it's same for all the humans. The synaptic changes, right? It's different between.
That is why we can do the experiments on monkeys.
My question was, I met a lot of people and they get interested to lose after doing. They still remember most of their. So if localization is happening inside the brain, but you still use half the brain.
How do you remember it?
That you still remember it.
We'll talk about it in next few slides. Okay. So let's talk about the bidirectional excitatory dynamics and attractors. Very big name. What it simply means is the multi-constraint problem that we were talking about earlier. If you know people, if you know red jacket, you can basically, what you do is the neuron activations reach a state that has the least energy, or basically it is in the mutual consensus that fine, I see this crowd, I see a person here which has a red jacket, then yes, this is what I was looking for. What is happening? the neurons, their activations are basically falling into a gravity well and reaching a state that is mutually acceptable.
So by low energy state, you mean low energy aggregated across
Yes.
awareness data?
Yes, yes, yes. Right? So this is like a simple concept. Now let's talk about, okay, we covered bidirectional excitatory. So we know that things can go forward and we also know things can go backward. Right? We all know this?
How do you so you're going from the attractor basin, I mean, is it a artifact of the diagram or so multiple trajectories can lead to the same state, right? So how
Yes.
do you find the optimal optimization? This is essentially an optimization problem.
So you keep on testing. You keep on testing and then finally when you find the most accurate, what do you say, the state that we say is acceptable.
Could you explain it? I don't understand.
Yes. So basically, like your question is, you have to try multiple things to fall into that, right? So yes, our brain tries multiple things and then falls. It happens, our brain is highly parallelizable. So it tries multiple such, multiple such methods and finally it drops down.
So is this related to the plasticity aspect of the brain?
Plasticity will come in the next slides.
So when you say that the aggregate sort of excited or the aggregate energy level goes lower, does that mean that the weight given to the electrical signal coming from another neuron is different from that coming from a synapse?
You can understand it as a mutual consensus, right? Basically, different neurons are firing. They are trying to find a mutually acceptable situation. Once it finds that, we say that fine, yes, the job has been done, right? Now, as I said, our brain is, the neocortex has 85% excitatory neurons and we have 15% inhibitory neurons, right? Inhibitory says, no, you can't do it. Excitatory says, yes, you can do it, right? And we are always on the verge of an imbalance happening, right? So it only makes sense to understand how this inhibition actually happens. So inhibition means how the neuron actually communicates that fine, calm down. So there is basically feedback and then there is the feed forward inhibition at the backward level and at the forward level, right? So I like to understand it from a LinkedIn analogy. So let's say Gemini, some new model comes, right? And suddenly everybody will say, yay, AGI has been achieved, right? So that is the excitatory. But let's say somebody comes and says, calm down, bro. We still cannot do it. It's like, calm down. So this is the inhibition part. So it basically acts as a feedback to the excitatory thing and tells that, fine, it basically brings things to a check, right? This is the LinkedIn example. Now what we are seeing is the feed forward, which is a bit more tricky and a bit more informed, I would say. So what it does is that based on some input, let's say the Gemini model came, now the excitation, the LinkedIn posts will come after doing a check on the inhibition as well. Not just following blindly the excitation route, it will also check with the inhibition route to see that is it actually correct or not. And finally the excitation will again come with the inhibition included in it. Is it clear?
So in that same analogy, it's like you're researching about it and then
yes.
oh yeah, then
while it's sending forward, it's basically doing a check as well. Should I do it or not? Right?
So feed forward network example with the input. So that would be something like a muscle fiber it's inputting something to a muscle and then it's not. So that input is not going to an external something?
Yes, can be thought of like that. Basically, while it's firing, it also does a check if it should do it or not. And then it sends it to excitatory. Right? Now we talk about the Hebbian learning part. I think you must have heard about it. If two neurons fire together, they will wire together. Right? And I wanted to actually cover it in a bit more depth. You can actually read it in the chapter number 4 that I sent in the pre-reading material. We don't have a lot of time to cover it, so I'll just move ahead. But basically, what we just saw right now was the basics of computational cognitive neuroscience. Then we saw how a neuron works. We saw how networks can lead to emergent behavior. And then we talked about something called as learning, the Hebbian learning, where we are seeing that if two neurons in a network fire together, like let's say neuron A fires and neuron B also fires, and there is a correlation, then the synapse between them should be stronger, basically because they are related. So it only makes sense to trust the friend, trust the postsynaptic neuron.
Firing forever or for the time?
It changes. So if let's say the firing at some point, let's say the presynaptic firing does not lead to postsynaptic firing after some time, then it will say fine, the trust is degrading, I cannot trust this guy, so the synaptic connectivity will drop down.
But they are never actually connected. Synapses are still floating.
Yes, synapses are floating, yes. So what happens is that two synapses have channels open, we saw, right? So we were talking about a channel called NMDA, right? NMDA is the learning channel, right? So what happens is that let's say a neuron fires. How many of you are bored or tired or interested? Like what's going on? Just wanted to understand. How many are still energetic? Hands. Oh, nice. Nice. So where was I? I was telling NMDA, right? So the neuron has NMDA channels, right? Now let's say a neuron fires, right? Presynaptic neuron fires, and we also see that postsynaptic neuron is firing. So there will be a potential that flows through the synapse again, right? And these NMDA channels will open, and when the glutamate hits it, the NMDA channels will open and calcium will flow inside. Calcium again, basically it helps in the strengthening of two particular synapses. They will become more rigid and like bigger, right? So when that happens, the learning thing happens. The learning will happen. So basically that is how the overall thing happens. But let's say, yes.
Can I just start?
Definitely.
You have like a presynaptic neuron, you have like a postsynaptic neuron. So the presynaptic neuron is the one that sends the input and it goes to the postsynaptic neuron. If the postsynaptic neuron fires, then that electrical activity again goes back to the synapse. That's when that synapse knows that okay, this neuron has fired. So when that both happens, then only the NMDA channel will open. So if the presynaptic neuron has to pass the electrical activity, and if this postsynaptic neuron fires, the electrical activity again like goes back towards the synapse, and both happens, then the NMDA channels will open, and the calcium ions will flow, and they alter the synaptic weights. So it's basically like adding more synaptic channels or something.
Yes, that's the exact thing I was trying to say, but I was not able to say. Right.
What's the implication of like postsynaptic neuron firing with the presynaptic?
Then that means that this presynaptic neuron is somehow able to influence the postsynaptic, right? That's what they're holding, right? So that means it's somehow the presynaptic neuron information is important for the postsynaptic.
That's the principle of if neurons fire together, they're firing together. So their aggregators get more related.
Yes. So we have got all the ingredients to understand memory now, which is what we were here for, right? So we will talk about the most interesting part, that is the episodic memory. Now, do you remember what you ate last week? You remember? You remember last week what you ate?
When is last week? Maybe it was last month, then yeah.
Wow. Outlier. Okay. So our brain has this thing called as hippocampus, and it's like a continuous tape recorder, right? Every second of your life it is recording stuff and basically storing it inside our brain. And basically we do not actually try to recall it, so we forget it, but our brain is constantly making memories as we go on, and we keep the relevant part with us, right? You will notice that there is something called as hyperthymesia. Now, how many of you have done chemistry, inorganic chemistry? Oh yes. You have to memorize everything. Everything works on rehearsal, right? You have to keep on memorizing. And this is actually, notice that there is a condition called as hyperthymesia, where people have this OCD or tendency to keep on rehearsing what they have done, and essentially they have become so good at it that they remember years worth of data, something that they are not able to forget, right? So our brain, how does it make memories? It keeps on rehearsing things, and if you do not rehearse, it says, okay, fine, this is bad, I don't want it, I will only keep the relevant part, right? So that is how our brain is basically continuously storing memories, and rehearsal is basically making it stronger. Now, these are two graphs. There is something called as AB/AC testing. So what happens is, let's say I have given you words like camera, Saurabh, right? Laptop, I don't know your name, sorry. Nihar, right? And we give a lot of such it's uncorrelated pairs, right? And I tell you to remember them, right? And I tell you to keep remembering them till you have a 100% score on remembering all of them, right? And suddenly I say camera Pringles, right? The whole setup has changed. The A remains same, but the partner has changed. So we try to see how the recall is affected inside the brain, right? And this is the plot. Now, if you look at it, it basically says the AB list, that is, it's basically we are trying to recall the initial list, it reaches 100%. And then we have the AC list, which basically is degrading. So as we remember the new list, the old stuff we start to forget. Yes. ABAC are like, you have the same left side and you ask a person to remember the right side, AB, right? And after that, when the person has remembered it, you say fine, now we will remember AC and test it, right? Then we will check if the person remembers AB or not correctly. And that is what we are seeing here, that with significant trials, the recall is dropping. The person has started to forget it. Why is it happening? Because our brain has continuous encoding going on, right? But when we show conflicting or similar information, there is a catastrophic interference. What that means is that we just talked about having distributions inside, right? Like if we talk about a chair, multiple different parts will light up inside the brain. And when we talk about like similar lists like AB and AC, these different informations are interfering with each other, which makes us difficult to recall it, right? But if you look at how the learning model, a similar neural network that we trained, what happens if we train it on AB and then we see AC? It drops. But that is not the case with humans, right? So there is something wrong in our formulation, right? Neural networks are wrong. Neural networks are wrong, right? They don't work.
They just lose information.
Yes. They work actually. And we noticed something that will help us. We have all the clues in the slides. We talked about inhibition, right? What does inhibition do? It says to do specific firings. Don't fire for everything. So we noticed that in our memory, the hippocampus memory, that basically the episodic memory that hippocampus creates, it fires very distinct, very unique firings. So basically it helps us in remembering information better than the general neural network, because the general neural network is generalized pattern across all names, all the pairings, and it falls as soon as we show it the new stuff. So yes, this brings us to the hippocampus, the most complicated part. Personally, I spent 3 hours again yesterday just to understand what's going on, revising. So I'll just give a very brief overview of what is happening, right? We have the parietal cortex, we have the IT cortex, that is the inferotemporal cortex, right? Inferotemporal basically is the object understanding that is going on. The parietal cortex is basically where the stuff is, where and what, right? These information fall into something called as entorhinal cortex, right? This is the gateway of hippocampus, where the memories, the episodic memories are created, right? Now there will be few complex firings that will help us in making these unique patterns, unique distributed patterns inside our brain that helps us remember it. Anyone why do we need unique firing patterns to remember memory, to have this remember?
There is no way to distinguish between any of the two.
Yes, because there is no catastrophic interference, right? And this is the job of hippocampus. So what happens? This entorhinal cortex sends information to something called as CA1. CA1 and entorhinal cortex are basically autoencoder pairs, neural networks, deep learning, right? So it sends a representation to CA1, and its job is to recreate the same representation and send it back to EC, entorhinal cortex, and it sends to dentate gyrus and CA3. CA3 is the place where you basically form these unique patterns of firing. What happens? Entorhinal will send it to dentate gyrus, which does a sparse firing. These two informations will combine into CA3, that will create a unique firing, and this process will keep on going like a recurrent loop. And what it does is it makes the the neurons, the Hebbian learning thing that we were saying, to glue together. So, and a particular type of distribution glues together, and we see a similar pattern firing always. Okay? Right. Any questions here? Because this is complicated. Neurons are the fundamental part, right? Neurons are the fundamental part. When we combine all these neurons, it leads to emergence of these particular blocks, right? Everybody is able to understand it? Okay. In this diagram, we are trying to create unique firings and storing memory inside the brain.
Does the brain store memory? Is the brain storing memories?
Yes, the brain stores memories.
Are different parts of hippocampus, different set of neurons connected to, or are these groups formed by different sets of neurons from each of these regions, or is it?
Yeah, all are connected with each other. Everything is connected.
But remembering one thing, is the loop of neurons which are forming this loop different from remembering the other thing?
So I like to think of it as lights, right? Lights. A lot of lights are firing, unique type of firings of each light, right? What we are trying to do is whatever information we are sensing, whatever we are seeing outside, we try to encode it into a unique firing of lights that is not colliding with some other kind of firing, so that the storage becomes easier, right? Because if two types of firings happen together, like same firings, then there will be confusion. What exactly does it correspond to? I don't know. It's not unique. So this is what hippocampus is trying to do. It's trying to break down the information that is coming into unique firings, which when back propagate will lead to the activation of same kind of stimulus that we were seeing that times, and that is how memories are recalled. Able to understand? What happens when you recall a memory?
That the loop just runs again.
Yes. So basically, let's say, okay, I'll just move to the next slide. Wait. Remember that funny memory while you were on that trip? Do you remember what I'm talking about? What was that funny moment on your trip? Yes, exactly. So based on this incomplete information, the CA3 will complete the pattern. You have few parts. Based on that, it will basically create the entire firing pattern, and that will help us in recalling the entire thing. And as many times as we do, a rehearsal is happening here. So those connections become more stronger, and we remember them for a longer period of time.
So this is basically a brain's recall like to query our own memory.
Yes.
So when we're like reciting, like for example, if I'm studying for a test and I keep reciting, so it's just the hippocampus that's basically keep on retrieving it. And
yeah, it's making the rehearsal faster and basically gluing things strongly.
Are we saying that there's no isolation between storage and recall or compute, essentially? Like we are computing continuously what we want to recall.
Yes.
We are referring to a part of the whole memory, right?
Yes.
Taking an example, funny incident on the trip. Even if, let's say, trip to Bangalore, but how do you like find that specific part within, because you would remember the entire trip.
Yes.
or let's say some significant parts. So how does it know which part to sort of navigate to?
That's the job of CA3. So let's say I remember the trip example. It will basically try to complete the pattern, something like in painting, I would say, right? So it completes the whole image based on what it's seeing, and it can basically, based on whatever information you have, the prior information, it will try to estimate what the correct, basically it will send different types of firings, and that will relate to whatever information you are talking about.
What is the EG
Sorry? This is dentate gyrus. So we have the stimulus coming from the brain, right? It sends to dentate gyrus, whose job is to create sparse encodings, right? So I'll show you what it does. So this is the dentate gyrus, right? Now a mouse was shown different shapes, all right? And we noted down the firings inside the brain. We saw that dentate gyrus creates a sparse distributed firing inside the part, right? And then we say CA3 also. So these two informations basically combine together to create a very basically survival of the fittest kind of thing. Only the strongest activations will basically be retrieved.
Can you say it helps with lateral thinking?
Yes, kind of. Right. So we talked about this. Now we talked about like completing the pattern, right? So this brings us to a very important question. Should I? Yes.
So how, like we keep getting new voltage for each firing and all that, and each kind of memory. So how does the brain know which one to put? Is it like a self-organizing map, which is like it's getting, okay, this is where that will be, but you said everything is dynamic also. So like how do you know where some memory kind of thing, because everything you said is basically like an energy gap where it finds the thing and finds out that memory. But then how do you, like, tell me if it's a memory about this trip, or if it's a memory about some exam, how am I going to, which voltage should I put, because everything is dynamic.
I would say don't think about it in terms of voltage. I would say think about it in terms of firings.
Then how do you tell, because everything is, again, Hebbian is also happening, somehow getting wired together. So it's like, keeps changing. So how does the brain keep on knowing, this is where...
Rehearsal.
It's not just related to brain also, it's also related to the environment you are in. What place you are in, what people are around you. They will also impact or find what it means.
I would like to think about it in terms of firings, as I said. Basically, when you are seeing a similar kind of information, you will be led to a similar kind of firing, a unique kind of firing. So that helps us in remembering the whole trip, right? So we talked about pattern completion, right? Now the question is, if I remember something, should I make a new memory of it or keep on recalling what I saw earlier? Then?
Since you said it is like a file system, maybe it goes to the cache first. If I have enough of this into my system, if yes, then I'll complete the pattern. Or if it is a new category, I don't recall enough.
I think you are very close to what happens. So this question, should I store a memory or should I not, brings us to the complementary learning system. What it says is that the hippocampus is very good at storing unique memories, right? Something that does not require inference, like where is the car parked? I don't need to find logics or patterns inside it, right? But extracting yes. So what happens is that while the hippocampus is continuously retrieving the information, it also sends some signals to the neocortex to build cognition. So what it does is, let's say you have seen multiple car parkings or multiple learnings from these car parkings, it will start overlapping and creating a distributed learning, distributed information, right? Something like what we were talking about chairs, right? There were different firings, but we know the concept of chair because we have seen so many chairs that we can categorize them into the buckets, right? So that is what we are talking about here, the complementary learning system. This essentially helps us solve the problem of, should I complete the pattern or store a new memory? It helps us see the entire picture of it. So we talked about this, what the cortex learns, right? It basically creates lots of unique firings that helps us store the memory. If we keep on rehearsing those, then it will also create a generalized pattern inside the neocortex that basically helps us understand the, it helps us do the cognition part, right? So yes, this is a super important thing, and I think you all must relate. So our parents said sleep on time, sleep is very important. It actually is very important, because if you don't sleep, whatever you were doing in hippocampus, there is a lot of evidence that states that when you are sleeping, hippocampus basically rewinds the whole memory, whatever has happened in the day, and sends the general patterns inside the neocortex. It helps us basically develop generalities. But if you don't do it, if you don't take your sleep properly, that won't happen. So basically you will get a bit dumb with time. So sleep is very important. Now, okay, yes.
You mean sleep, is it not active or giving brain rest?
Sleep. So chilling out. You sleep. You are sleeping. Basically, you are letting. So when I'm talking about evidence, the evidence states exact sleeping. So REM cycle.
I think it happens during meditation as well, like when during deep meditative state. Like
there must be material about, I don't know. But yes. Yes. So basically it helps us, the REM cycle basically helps us in developing the generalities, and it's very important. Sleep good. Yes. So now that we have studied the, yes.
Go back to that slide about hippocampus.
This one?
Yeah. So when you said like fast learning, slow learning. So we can describe that the slow learning happens between the neocortex, parietal and IT.
So it keeps on sending. So let's say you do a pattern completion, or you are sleeping, you are doing something, right? So you have this information coming inside, right, from the parietal cortex and infotemporal cortex. It reaches here, then it completes the pattern, right, and then it sends back. So basically it completes the information that came, and that is how it creates the generalities. It's basically trying to merge all the information inside the neocortex.
And the way is that so the parietal cortex and inferior temporal cortex are like the neocortex where you store the long-term memory.
Yes.
So say for example, like if you ask me to describe this room tomorrow, then I have to use my hippocampus to recollect everything.
Yes.
But if I come here regularly, what happens is that those memories
become generalities.
Then slowly gets transferred to the parietal cortex and inferior temporal cortex.
Yes.
So after a while, I don't need the hippocampus to recollect how those.
You know the exact thing. Yes.
So that slow learning happens. Slowly, this hippocampus skills to transfer those memories to the parietal cortex.
Yes.
And inferior temporal cortex.
Yes.
So one doubt I had is so you were pointed out that CA1 and the dendrite gyrus, the second encoder decoder. So does it actually like do encoding decoding like that?
This is the encoder decoder, autoencoder. So the job of CA1 is specifically to fire the same kind of activation that came from here and repeat the cycle to sort of glue together all the firings, make the connection strong enough that you remember them.
Okay, so does it, when you say encoder decoder, does it actually mean that it converts it to another?
Yes, it basically sends back the same signal. If you want to read about it, I mentioned chapter number 7 in the CCN book. You should definitely look at it. It's a very interesting chapter, and in fact this is one of the chapters that I felt that the modern deep learning is not covering properly. Like we have covered a lot of stuff going on, feed forward, we have seen sigmoid, we have seen so much, but we have not talked about the memory part yet, and nobody is talking about it. So if you want to learn, it's a great place.
Very random thought, but while storing memories, right, what role does emotion play while storing, like for example, there's a death, right, for example. What is happening inside of our brain that, you know, makes it a significant event that it's very there in our brains?
I think the answer is related to dopamine. There is a lot of evidence that states that when a very unique event happens inside the brain, it releases dopamine. And dopamine is strongly related to making memories. So you can read about it. I think it's chapter number 10, if I'm not wrong, in the book. Right? Yes. So we covered all this. How many of you are tired? A lot of you. Yes. So I'll cover it very quickly. We are talking about whatever we studied. How does it translate to the modern deep learning? Have we done something similar? Right? So this is a paper from ByteDance. I think this paper came out 3 months back, and it talks about something called as artificial hippocampus networks. Right? How many of you know KV caching? Okay. How many of you know attention mechanism? Okay, a lot of you. Right? So you know attention mechanism scales quadratically, right? O(n) square. And if you like keep on scaling it, the GPU will blow up. To save from this GPU, what we do is we do KV caching. Basically, instead of storing the entire, let's say I am a cat, and it generated meow after that, right? So what we will do is, instead of computing I am a cat again, we will store the KV pairs. That will let us generate the new, the encoding for meow just by looking at the new KV pair. So we can do the computation really fast and save a lot of memory, right? But even doing that, it will not scale well for very long contexts, right? A good example of storing long-term context is something that we have read during our deep learning courses, the RNN. RNN is able to store longitudinal memory in a compressed state, right? The hidden state. So they try to take those concepts, and basically they are trying to build something called as a multi-store model, storing short-term memory and the long-term memory in a compressed sense by using similar concepts to RNN, right? I'll show you what it does. Okay, so I have to, multi-store modeling is basically, we just saw the CLS model, right? Which talks about basically long-term memory and the short-term in the hippocampus, something that requires inference, and the other one that builds on the generalities. This is the previous model, like the older one, the earlier one. And this is something that we use in this paper. It talks about the sensory memory that is very short-lived, few milliseconds, the short-term memory that has the limited capacity, and we have the long-term memory that is highly durable and is made by rehearsal. So what it talks about is that the short-term memory, the KV caches, and the list that we had, we can basically keep a sliding window, right? That's fine. This is something that I'll store as it is. But for all the long context otherwise, we can basically compress it into a single embedding, right? To store the generalized pattern. Questions? All good? Or tired? Yes. So we know what KV cache is, right? Now KV caches, the problem is that even if you scale it for long-term memory, there will be a point where KV cache basically explodes, right? It will not be able to sustain. So what we do is we say, fine, I don't want to store everything. I'll just store a particular window and keep everything else into one compressed state that I can recall, and this will act as my long-term memory, the generalized patterns. And this is short-term memory to build upon. Now clear? Everybody clear? So this is basically how it happens, right? So let's say you have this window, right? A new token comes. Basically a new token gets out of the sliding window. So it will take the earlier state, the hidden state, and merge it with the new token that is coming to create H1. So when this H1, this new state, the long-term state, and the, what do you say, the output of this short-term memory combines, it gives us the next token. Do you see what is happening here? We are combining long-term and short-term memory. And this gave some really good results. So, yes. So basically this module is called AHN, Artificial Hippocampus Network. And we saw that when we apply this, the flops decrease drastically. We see a 40% decrease in flops. And guess the memory cache. It's constant almost, 74% decrease. It's crazy. And I mean, I still need to check out the code. This is the paper that I have read, but you know how deep learning works. But if it is true, it says that there is so much material available inside the internal workings of memory to exploit and create efficient systems, right? So this is mostly the implementational side. Now they state that this artificial hippocampus network can basically be attached to a window attention, right? And we can do two things. Either we can use KL divergence to basically train on the teacher model, that is the complete model, right? Or we can train from scratch using AHN. It was noticed that if we do KL divergence, the results are marginally better. And it is because, like, this is something that they state as the future scope, but they state it is because the KL divergence is not letting the model take any shortcuts, right? So, yes.
Sorry, in the previous thing is the, why is the compression happening over the KV cache?
Because even if you have KV pairs, still at some point they will explode.
Okay.
Right? So even though it is making stuff more efficient, but at some point that efficient will also become not efficient for long-term context. And for that AHN comes. So this is just simple working. I think you will be very tired, but basically it's saying that it takes the previous state, then it takes the KV pair, that newly KV pair, combines it to create the new hidden state. And these were few results. So they tried it on Mamba 2, DeltaNet. I think they tried it on Quen 2.5b, Quen 2.53b, and gated DeltaNet. These are few models, and they did multiple ablations to understand if this thing actually works or not. And there is this LV eval. This is for the long context evals. The scores improved drastically. So there is a lot of scope of research in this particular domain. And this is what we are seeing. So this is Quen 2.53b. We see that on a marginal 0.04% parameter increase, it is showing a 40% drop in flops, 74% drop in memory cache, and an improvement in the evaluation. So quite crazy. Sorry? Floating point operations. Yes. Basically how many computations it is doing. Yeah. So key takeaways from this paper is that AHNs unify RNN compression and transformers to create a long context memory. Right? Then we talk about significant compute and memory storage, memory savings, mainly because we took something from the brain itself, right? And then the general, whatever the procedure we were talking about. So this was the entire setup.
Sorry, one thing on that, the bullet points that you have. It's not necessarily true that it's not dropping passcode, because it is still lossy. It's just very good, but it's still lossy, right? So there is some.
Yes, there is.
Because RNN compression.
Yes, definitely. There is definitely going to be loss because we are compressing. So so KV cache in itself is high fidelity, like 100%.
Yeah, it's lossless.
Right? Yeah, lossless. But here we are compressing, so there will be definitely some kind of loss. But actually, it turns out it's good for the model. The scores are improving after this. So yes. I did not prepare an ending slide, but that is all what we will cover today. So how we started? We talked about the computational cognitive neuroscience. Then we talked about the structure of neuron, how they fire. Then we talked about the memory, the networks, learning, memory, and then the model. You covered all of this in last 1 hour. So, yes. Oh, one thing. This was a very superficial, like, don't think that you have understood the domain. Yes, very, very superficial. And there is a lot of material available. I would definitely suggest you to read the Yuko Manakata book that I gave in the Desirables. It's a beautiful book. And yes, thank you so much.